Welcome to Awakening Within. I'm your host, Jill McPherson, and on today's show we're going to be talking about how play is the new PhD. And I have a special guest that I actually met at Family Transition Place, put on an amazing event in March of this year for Women's International Day. And their guest speaker, Kelsey Ramadan, was there, and I had the opportunity to speak to her afterwards and realized I definitely wanted her on my show. She's the top female entrepreneur in Canada, and I'm so honored that she was able to make it to Orangeville to come and be on part of the show. So welcome, Kelsey.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So when I first asked you on the show, I was thinking about what you shared that day at the event about balance and keeping a balance, and I thought that's what we were going to first start into. And then when I was Googling you and researching and doing my homework, I decided that I came across the YouTube video that you did that's called "Play is the New PhD," and that really resonated with me because I am a teacher and with the local school board, and so much of what you said is what I feel is so relevant and so true to education today. And so just for our audience, just let's start into that about like, well, what do you mean by PhD, play is the new PhD?
Right. I think, well, the fundamentals of that talk I gave at a TEDx event in Kelowna, and was really about this notion that we have this perception that education in its traditional sense, so you go through grades K through 12, and then you may go to college or some manner of training, and then you may go on to do other things, and that those little bits of paperwork are really our education. And I think that for my own self, having been a traditional, what I would consider educational failure, so my permanent record would show that I didn't do tremendously well jumping those kind of traditional scholastic hurdles. I mean, I graduated high school, and I collected a numeracy of paperwork thereafter, but those things didn't measure in me what ultimately made me successful. And I think that play, so when I started to try and figure out why is it that I'm successful but all my grades were terrible? Okay. Why is it that what I was told all along, like you're not really good enough or not really smart enough, isn't proving to be reality in what is my adult life? And so I thought, okay, well, let's figure this out. Like, why I couldn't be the only exception to the rule of like you're a dummy, right. But it's going to work out. And so I started doing a lot of research about actually how our minds work and how they're wired, and how we can kind of deviate from this traditional model of intelligence per se. And what I found was that when we're young and we play in a very open format, that those create, for lack of a kind of a better way of explaining it, roadways. And that we start to create these roadways, different highways in our minds, ways to solve problems, ways to understand the world, whether it's in a traditional educational system or in the big, great wide world that we all operate in. And that the more of those roads you build, the more likely you are to find a solution. You can just imagine, if you had a map with one road, then there's one outcome.
Right.
If you have a map with many roads, there are many opportunities for
many ways
outcomes
to get to the destination.
Yeah, and so play, in its most kind of fundamental sense, is engaging in an activity without a result or purpose. You're just there in and of itself. You're just doing. You're being. Right. You're taking it on as it is, and you're creating solutions or outcomes as they occur or appear to you. And as things become ever more Googleable,
right.
That traditional educational model becomes less and less relevant. So if I want to learn about the Diamond E strategy model, I don't have to go and pay $100,000 for an MBA like I used to. I can just Google strategic ways of solving problems, and I'll get all those models, and I can learn them on
your own
the internet in my own time. And so what was the traditional model of gaining these pieces of paper and accessing knowledge, as it were, I think is being phased out to a great degree by experiential learning, play.
Right.
And that the more you allow yourself to play, the more you allow yourself a couple of things. First, the ability to accumulate knowledge. May not come with a piece of paper, but it's like making leftover soup. The more ingredients you have to make something, the more likely it is that something will taste good.
Right.
And so the same thing applies to solutions. whether it to be to relationship problems or mathematical problems. The more experience you have, the better it is. And then the second piece is that the more you're open to the possibility of a different outcome. So I think a lot of times we assume we're going to solve a problem with our current subset of information, and then we can't figure out why we can't figure it out.
Right.
And that's usually because we've only got so many ingredients, and the missing ingredient is somewhere else. So you have to be courageous enough to allow yourself the permission to go and do something new, so that you have a new ingredient to add to that kind of puzzle of life. And the more ingredients you have, the more experiences you have, the more play you've allowed yourself to take in, the more likely it is that you have the right ingredients to solve the problem. So for me, really, Play as a New PhD is all about this notion of not waiting for education to be told to you, to be relayed to you, some past exercise of someone else's experience, but that you go out and seek knowledge in your own way, and really allow your own experience to be the subset of information that we call an education. It's not just pieces of paper and four walls.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And you're talking about like divergent thinking there, like where not thinking of one path, one way to get to an end result, but having all these different
absolutely
ways to get there.
That's part A, and then part B is, I think, the actual. So say you have a problem you want to solve. It doesn't even have to be called a problem. You have an opportunity you want to decide on, or anything is happening. You have something to think about, and you'd like a result from that. Oftentimes we approach that in a very traditional educational way. So we're going to figure it out. I need to figure out something.
Right.
So we sit at our desk and we mull it, or we drive in our car and we. But very rarely is that when the moment of the solution or the result we're looking for comes to us. Like it comes to us in the shower, or we're riding our bike, or you're randomly, folding clothes and something, that's what it is.
Right.
And that is the free thinking. That's that open space of play. So although folding laundry to me isn't particularly like a good time or what we would call play, but it's that mind state that oftentimes we only get to when we're in, like an adult play could be any time,
right.
But it's when we're not sitting there focused on solving the problem.
Right. Mm-hmm. And because that's what I was going to say, like, what do you mean by play? So you're not necessarily talking about, playing a game of soccer, or like, it could be.
Right, it could be.
Could be.
But then it's not about how many goals did I score. It's about, was I playing a game of soccer?
Right.
Was I actually like gaming, just openly considering how many people do I have to pass to? It's not just about what was the score.
Right. So if we bring this back though to education, then do you see this really being an important message to share with our young people about following that passion? I mean, one phrase I say to my kids all the time is, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life.
Right.
And because I want them to decide their career based on their gifts, their passion, their talents, not because the statistics say this is the career to get into, or this is where the money's at.
Right.
And I just trust that when they follow their passion and when they play, that the abundance will come. And it sounds like that's what you needed to figure out for yourself, because you didn't follow that typical paradigm of like, work hard, get good grades, and you'll get the great job and you'll make the money.
Right.
You worked hard, didn't get the good grades, it didn't work for you, and somehow became quite successful.
I think it's a bit of a hybrid. So I often say, don't follow your bliss just blindly. So I know a lot of great yoga instructors who open yoga studios who fail.
Right.
Okay, so you're great at yoga. You're terrible at business.
Okay.
So there's a big difference between kind of this notion of follow your bliss blindly,
yes,
and follow your bliss with intention.
Right.
So if my intention is to make yoga my career,
right,
great. So what does that look like? That looks like I have to surround myself with people who have these skill sets that I have recognized are not my strong suit.
Right.
So my strong suit is negotiating and building relationships, and math. I'm great at math. Okay. So what am I not good at? And what does my career look like? Okay, so I want to be an entrepreneur. Okay, so I have terrible grades. Okay, that's fine. What do I have to surround myself in order to support me in following those things that I recognized aren't measured by my socials 12th grade.
Right.
And I think my message to kids around that would really be recognize when whatever activity you're involved in. So you're in grade 11 or wherever you are, recognize out of that experience what you need to get from it. So I'll use my MBA as an example. I went to do my MBA. I knew I had to pass. I needed a piece of paper, but I wasn't going to get straight A's. I wasn't going to be on the dean's list, but I wanted relationships. So I spent my whole time in MBA being the chair of every single committee, so all these social things, doing all this, so I could meet people and decide for myself who I wanted to associate with, so that 10 years out, I would know a great person who knew a great person who was involved in this kind of law or whatever it was, because I knew that 10 years later, no one would be asking me for my grades. I wasn't going into investment banking. Now,
Right.
different hat. If you want to be an investment banker, well, head down, folks.
Right.
It's grades all day.
Right.
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 And get to know a couple of people in finance. So it's really about identifying what do you need to get out of this experience, not what do people say this experience is valuable for.
Right.
It's about for your own self and where you want to get to. What can you harvest from this thing, and kind of abandon that, what everyone says it's supposed to be about, because it's just not possible that every experience that every child has can be served by a formal traditional education system. It's not possible.
Right.
So the onus is really on the person to say, okay, I do need to know this and this and this. Now I'll commit myself to knowing this and this and this, but here are the 8 things I just need to pass.
Right.
And I'm not going to get upset about getting a C-,
Right.
because that's my pass.
Right.
I don't need this.
Right.
Um,
And I find too, particularly in our education system, I really value, as a teacher and a parent, the learning skills on the report card. So the things like initiative, responsibility, cooperation, those are the skills that I feel would be far more of a predictor of success, because then you can apply.
Sure.
You can seek out the information, find out where your strengths are,
Yeah.
and then find the people, as you say, access the people who have the strengths that you need, and know, okay, so that's my weakness, so I've got that covered this way.
Great.
And you can do that rather than what facts did you remember from, as we were saying before the show, even like you can Google almost anything.
Yeah.
and get that information. And that's...
Yeah, so here's the thing. So what happens then is all this mass of all of us graduate grade 12. And then all of a sudden look around and go, wait a minute, well, who's telling me what to do next? Like, where is the exam? Where do I get told that I'm good enough?
Right.
And so, bummer, no one's going to tell you that. You have to figure that out for yourself. Like, maybe your mom will say, I love you and you're great, but she's always going to say that, whether or not you're successful, frankly.
My son says that all the time.
So we've kind of trained all these, I don't know, like the Pavlovian dog thing. So Pavlov trained these dogs, and when he rang this bell, he would feed them. And so every time he rang the bell, they would salivate. Whether or not they got fed, in the end, they didn't know. So the same thing happens with education. We're trained to take all this stuff in, and then,
Yeah, and we'll pick up on that
Okay.
when we come back. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Awakening Within. I'm your host, Jill McPherson, and today we're talking with Canada's top female entrepreneur, Kelsey Ramadan. And before we went to break, we were talking a little bit about, you gave an example of the Pavlovs dog, and I just want to pick up where we left off there. So, so why did you bring up that example?
Yeah, so I was just essentially talking about this experiment where this psychologist ran, where he had a selection of dogs, and he would ring a bell anytime he fed them. And then it got to the point where he could ring the bell and not feed them, and they would have the same response. They would salivate. And so the notion behind that kind of psychological experiment was conditioning. So we're conditioned to believe something's going to happen based on our past experience. And I think a lot of that comes out of the education system, and how we're raised to believe that success is based on some really fundamental kind of topical things, like get good grades, buy a house, get married, have some kind of income. And that oftentimes what happens then is, if those specific kind of taglines of success don't really align with what it is that makes you feel successful, and or those moments are so brief You know, you graduate from university and you walk across that stage, and then that's over. It's this kind of fleeting sense of success. And then oftentimes then what happens is people feel in lack. We wander around feeling unsuccessful, even though we've gone and achieved all of these things that should make us feel very successful.
Right.
And I often talk about this notion of being successful and feeling successful are two entirely different things.
Right.
In my own experience, the first time that I won Canada's #1 female entrepreneur, I got the award, and I remember leaving there going, what just happened? That was just such a it was a lovely experience, but it was so momentary, and I didn't feel successful at all. I felt, in fact, a bit like an imposter. I was like, oh, I hope nobody figures out that I wasn't the smartest person in that room, and I wasn't the richest person in that room, and I was, all these things that we think that success is. So my CV looks great, all my press and awards look lovely, but at that time I wasn't connected to any of that success because it wasn't what I valued. The things that I was being told I was great for weren't the things that I personally had a tremendous amount of value for. So there's a really big difference, I think, between what success looks like, and then we go and achieve all these things and somehow find that it's just crossing the finish line is so quick. But it's all the time spent doing the work that we should feel successfully connected to,
Right. It's that expression, and I know this is a quote, and I can't think of who, but recently I heard how success is not the key to happiness. Happiness is the key to success.
Absolutely.
And so it's being in that happy, playful state that brings us the success, and not necessarily the beliefs, as you say, these taglines along where a checklist of get this done, this done, this done, and then you'll be happy.
And then I'll do that when.
Right.
It's going to be when, or if I, should I, all that kind of stuff. I think the first thing, fundamentally, if we're talking about keys to success, I think the first thing is, what is success to you? Like, let's just start there.
Right.
Right? Which is a scary and daunting question.
Right.
Because it's very easy to conform. It's very easy to go, okay, what success looks like is a nice car and a nice house and, this, that, and the other thing. Okay, well, that's fine. But how does that feel? Is that actually nourishing you? Do you want to get up and work hard for that? Do you get up and go,
nice house,
nice car, which sounds very flippant.
Right.
But we can very much get into that kind of thing if it isn't really what nourishes, what makes us feel successful. So the very first thing is, what does success mean to you? And then what does that look like in your own world? And I think the next thing is giving yourself permission for that to be okay. Like, I have colleagues who've left multi-million-dollar businesses and gone a totally different route, and people go, oh my gosh, you're crazy, what are you doing? And,
right.
But if you have one life to live, would you like to live it feeling quite well about what it is that you're achieving, and wanting to get up to do that thing? I think I had some health battles myself, and kind of through that time period, I recognized that success is not a uniform thing, and it really isn't about the achievements. It's very much about what's happening and how you achieve those things, and that is a very personal and deep question. But it does take a full and very deep stop.
Right.
To say, what is this for me?
Right. So that's where you start off with people, helping them, just saying, what's success for you?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally my work I use something I developed called the compass. So I talk about compass over maps. So you have a map of what you think your life is going to turn out like.
Right.
And then at some point, that's not what happens, and it happens to everyone. And when that happens, a lot of people get stuck. So they're not enough, they're not smart enough, they're not good enough, they're not skinny enough, they don't know the right people, they don't have enough money. Like, insert whatever commentary here, storyline. I didn't graduate high school, I didn't get that job, whatever. And so really we develop a compass of, who are you when you're at your best self? And then aligning that with kind of some different things so that you can look at opportunities or places in your life instead of getting stuck and doing what I call the double dutch. You know, when you're double dutch skipping and then you do this for a really long time.
Yes.
And you never really do anything.
You never really jump in
But you're in
anywhere.
motion. Everyone looks like you're double dutch skipping, like I'm skipping.
Right.
But you're not.
Right.
Yeah, and
You're just getting ready to skip, but
Right.
you don't actually skip.
And so the compass that I work with people on is they walk away with a really clear understanding of how to make decisions for themselves that align with what they truly want, what makes them feel successful. And then the flip side of that compass is the antithesis. So all the sabotage, all the I'm not good enough, all the all the imposter syndrome stuff.
Right.
So you can recognize, oh, here's this thing I'm doing. Yeah. Clearly this is right. So I'm on a path that doesn't align with what I really want. So that's where I start with people around success and helping them to not only define it, but then achieve and attain it.
Okay.
You know, you have to get clear on what the next step is, because now it's not about making $1 million, or maybe it's actually about making 10, or maybe it's about making 100,000, or maybe it's about making 10,000. I don't know.
Right.
It just depends on what it is for you.
Right.
But it's getting out of that motion, which is a very comfortable place to be.
Right.
Because to everyone it looks good.
Right. And it can also be, I mean, when we're in that like waiting to jump in motion, that can be a lot to do with fear of making mistakes.
Absolutely.
Which, you know, in your YouTube video, you referred to Sir Ken Robinson, and he talks about that in his videos too, about that fear of when we have fear of making mistakes, we're not jumping in, we're not, using our creative abilities too to just jump in.
Right. Well, I always use two examples with people when we get to fear. One is, if you can identify a person who's ever learned to ride a bike on the first try, I would give you my life savings and my life itself. No one has ever done that, yet all of us can ride a bike. How shocking is that?
Right.
Right. So at some point it was totally okay to fail because we had an outcome that was worth trying for.
Right.
It was worth it to go through that. And we had this openness of mind that that's what we do. Failure is part of the learning process. But at some point we abandon that, which is really a shame. And then the second piece is I always say, would you like to be exceptional? Like based on your own definition, would you like to be exceptional? Everyone inevitably says, yes, I would.
Right.
And then I say, well, then at some point you must become an exception. You can't follow the rules. That everything is laid out the way that it is, because that doesn't actually create exceptional. That creates mediocre. That's the middle of the road.
Right.
That's normalcy,
Right.
which isn't bad. Normal
Right.
is normal. That's
Right.
why it's normal.
Right.
But if you want to be normal and ordinary and average, then that's fine. But that's what normal and ordinary and average kind of do.
Right.
So you can have that, which is
Yeah.
great.
But if
It's not bad,
Yeah. But there's choices.
but it's a choice.
And also, you must deal with people who are struggling with balance. I know back at the event with Family Transition Place, you spoke a lot about balance. And can you just share some of that insight of, especially women trying to balance the career and the home and trying to be successful?
Right. So on that, I would again say two things. One is, and this is not a popular statement, but stay with me. So the first, it's you can't have everything. Okay, but you can have what you want most.
Okay.
And so balance has been sold to us in the same way. So people say you can have it all, okay, but you can't. So by that I mean you can't have an empty email box, a totally clean house, a fresh manicure and pedicure, be 100% of the time with your kids, and 100% of the time pursuing your dreams and career, and 100% of the time spending, so if you want it all, you have to recognize, what do you actually want most? Okay?
Right.
Here's what I want most. Here's what I want second, third, fourth. And make some compromises and decisions. Like no in our society is kind of this dirty word, but you have to start saying no to the things that don't give you the time to say yes to the things you want most. So that's the beginning.
Right.
And the same thing applies to balance, which is the way that balance is sold to us. Marketing, it's great for those of people who sell based on balance.
Right.
The way it's sold to us is this kind of nirvana, like, everything is wonderful always.
Yeah.
And we try and control our way to balance, which is backwards. We have very little control. Life is happening oftentimes to us, and the thing we have most control of is ourselves. So the balance comes from balancing yourself, which is the
Okay.
harder job.
Right.
Which is why we love to buy all the stuff that we think will control our way to balance, scheduling apps and this and that, and, you know, organizing everything and Uber scheduling. Yeah, that's not how it goes.
Right. Yeah. And that reminds me too. I mean, I've had different people say to me, you know, oh, I see what you're doing with the show and different things. I don't know how you do it all. And I think you're right. It's about deciding whatever is important. And also most of the time I would say I'm in a state of play.
Right.
So I'm playing. I have a higher amount of energy. Time, you know, seems to be on our side when we're in that state of play. And yeah, and so the balance just kind of almost takes care of itself when you decide what your priorities are. And
Well, absolutely. It makes it very clear the things that they don't fit.
right.
You know, once you're clear on what you want, what's my definition of success? Who am I when I show up as my best self to get that?
Okay.
And then you recognize, okay, this is what I want most. I don't want it all. I want these things.
Right.
That's what will make me feel great every single day.
Right.
And then how can I show up for myself? And to do those things is about balancing yourself, which to some people means, you know, that means meditating for 15 minutes a day.
Right.
That means giving myself an hour a week to spend with my girlfriends. That means date night with my husband. That means this amount of something in my career or my whatever it is that you're doing. But it's about sketching that out for yourself
Right.
and balancing those things, because you know your kid's going to wind up with the flu on the day of the big meeting. That's what's happening. Okay, it does.
Yes.
And no amount of trying to control things will actually make you engage in that day with ease and balance. Right here.
So you'll handle that day far
Entirely
better
differently.
if you're in already a state of balance
Yeah.
than if you're trying to control
Chaos.
everything around you.
Chaos. It just throws in, you know.
Right, right. So just to wrap up then, you offer some courses online and in person as well? Or?
Yeah, so I do coaching and coursework and workshops. So I do them in person and online. Some of them are over a period of weeks and are done by people around the world, and some of them are done locally in London or around this area. Yeah.
Great. And you can check that out at our website. And thank you so much for watching. And I hope you have found something that will help you on your journey of awakening within.